Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. If you remember, back in week 7, we promised that we would be bringing a friend of all of ours back onto the show to really dig into some of the questions you had. So without further ado, let me welcome Ben Wright from the Instant Group. Ben, how are you today?
I'm good, Hector. Good to be back. And we've called this the hot seat 2 of the last 3 times. Are we going to call it that again today? Or has the seat cooled? Or is it the molten lava seat?
I guess we should let people let us know once this comes out. Were the questions hard enough? A lot of these questions came in from our listeners across the worldwide global co-working industry. So it's great to be able to take some of their questions, some of the questions I've had as a technologist, as someone who reads between the lines, mush them all together. And you've graciously accepted to answer these questions. So before we dive in any further, Ben, tell us a little bit more about your current role and how you're answering. What hat are you wearing today? Probably your only hat, I hope. But how are you answering these questions today? Where are you working? What is your role?
Yeah, that's great. So there have been a few changes I can share with the group. So I for the last year, since March 1st of 2024, I've been the global head of partnerships, which for all of 2024 meant every flexible space operator and every landlord globally was my customer or partner. Late last year, we made some choices to change my team a little bit and have it focus exclusively on operators. So your audience, right? And that's also meant as we've been able to move my group into what we call the marketplace business, is really focused on the websites that we have, driving demand to operators for that, building and launching new products like the Coworking rating or featured listings or more to come, operator specific products. That's really my remit. So it's gotten to be a much more focused role, and candidly, a role that I'm really familiar with, having done that at Upsuite and prior. So that's been the primary change, is really focusing very much on operators while keeping that global remit. And interestingly enough, for folks, I don't know if folks are listening, but I went to Australia and I went to Singapore, as well as going to Europe to visit my teams there earlier this year. And so I'm really not only focusing more on operators, but that focus is allowing me to spend more time and really getting to know operators everywhere in the world.
Amazing. So Ben, now in charge of kind of making sure that operators are successful through everything that the Instant Group does, not only here in North America, but across the entire blue marble that floats around the sky.
Yeah.
So ever since we put out that question as to what do people want to ask the Instant Group, we got a bunch of really interesting questions from everything like, what is the deal with IWG all across the roll-up of aggregators, into Incendium, managed spaces, your co-working ratings, and this thing called Worka. But let's start right at the beginning, Ben. And probably the hardest question, I think, is what is the Instant Group? What does it actually do? I've heard this so many times, both at conferences and in calls. So let's settle that straight. What is the Instant Group?
I assume the question is for all different audiences, right? Not just for operators. Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Cool. And I think you alluded to this, tell the story chronologically and as it's evolved. Is that right?
Right.
So yeah, the Instant Group started 28 years ago as a website filling serviced offices in London, right? So we're in one city, and back then that was primarily Regis, right? So it was one brand, and that predates almost every other brand, save a few in Australia and things like that, right? So that's how it started. Pretty soon after that, I think the company realized, and it definitely predates my involvement in the company. I've been with the company for 2 years. Soon after that, the company realized that businesses do like flexible terms, but they may want their own space. So it pioneered something called the managed office, also starting in London, flexible terms, but for single tenants. That has now grown to be 85% of the Instant Group's business. And those are of the hundreds of transactions we've done with largely large corporate clients, all but one has been over 5,000 square feet. There's one that was like 4,900 square feet. So it really is a complementary product to helping fill co-working centers. So that's the second thing. Not long after, but sometime into the future, it bought a consulting business called Incendium that really specializes in workplace strategy, procurement, largely of real estate services for
Okay.
large corporates. So that's an incredibly talented group that has pioneered also things like ESG consulting when it was called ESG, or now sustainability, uh, launched that product for us, but also launched the Well co-working rating, truly some of the smartest people in the company, led by Sam Pickering. Soon after that, it decided that it had treated operators and landlords as a monolith, but also as just a receptacle for demand. And it wanted to be more thoughtful about the
Okay.
relationships that it had. So it had a function called Operator Solutions before 2.5 years ago, but it really launched the partnerships business that I now run about 2.5 years ago, with the intention of really being much more indispensable and much more strategic in how it relates to operators and landlords. And so that's the evolution of the business in its totality. And it's grown to be a pretty sizable business, hundreds and hundreds of people globally doing business in 160 countries. And yeah, I want to acknowledge it serves so many different audiences, from large corporates to landlords to co-working operators to small corporates to individuals looking to book space. It can be a confusing company to look at from the outside.
Yes, and that's probably why we probably still get that question. Hopefully, this resolves it for them. But I think if we had to summarize it in one sentence, you'd say it's a flex space services business, much in the same way as some other operators of commercial real estate. Would you agree with that, or is there more to it than just that?
I would say it's a sophisticated, um, flexible workspace broker, essentially a design build firm for small offices.
Mhm.
That moving towards a more tech enabled, tech forward, product forward business as the industry also moves in that direction. Still not a
Right.
short, still not a short explanation. Uh,
Well,
but I would, in my world, I'd say we're a broker moving to become more of a marketplace.
okay, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And it's
That does not
interesting.
include the managed business. In fact, managed team would say, Ben, what are you talking about? But that's basically it. In the world that I'm in, we're a broker, flexible workplace broker, becoming a marketplace.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's also the fact that it's called group allows it to have these different modules or
Right.
companies within it, right? So I think, yeah, trying to encapsulate a whole entire group of multiple businesses into one sentence was going to be a fool's errand anyway. So I said drop on that one and I apologize. What I'd love to do though, is you did mention that you're a brokerage slash marketplace moving into tech. There is one elephant in the room when we mentioned that, and that's a couple of months ago, or maybe 2-ish years ago now, IWG and Instant reached a deal. It involved IWG handing over a whole bunch of their digital platforms, their aggregation businesses, investing some into the Instant Group, and then taking I think it's an ownership share or a slight majority share. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of these. But there still hasn't been a very good Q&A about what does that deal look like? What does it mean? Can we dive into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this was done before I joined. Um, and it was basically that. It was IWG essentially investing cash, but also assets, transitioning some of its digital assets that included DaVinci, Coworker, Easy Offices, and more into the Instant Group for what really was an 88% share back then. And so the intention and the strategy behind that was really that IWG as an operator is valued, as a public company, is valued at a certain multiple that typically is consistent with being an operator, but it
Mm.
had such scale that it had dabbled into things that could and were actually serving the whole market at the time. So it was a way for it to invest in and build something that could ultimately serve the whole market. And so the investment in my group is also very similar. You might ask, why does a company like that have somebody like me whose entire customer base now is operators. It's because it itself, the group that includes all these assets and including IWG and Instant, will be a much more valuable entity if it can take those global strengths, that scale, and apply it to the whole market. So the whole market thing is actually where the supply part of the business has been built. And so that's why I'm at the company.
It makes a lot of sense. It does raise one of the questions that we keep hearing is, with such a majority stake in the company, is it okay? It's fair in some ways to assume that operators will be less trusting of a aggregator, platform, etc., that's owned by a potential competitor that has the budget to deploy new locations around a successful location. Now, how do you normally address that? I know I've asked you a similar question on stage before, but how should operators really think about the relationship between the Instant Group and IWG as it stands today?
Yeah. So I'll answer this from the perspective of somebody that built a small scale marketplace in North America, which is Upsuite, and who watched a lot of my, let's call it cohort companies, from Liquid Space to Upflex to Hubble to others, essentially struggle to grow or get acquired themselves in Hubble's case, right? Um, at some point at some point for the industry to, and by industry, flexible workspace, for it to evolve, it it needs organizing forces. And it's actually easy to start a marketplace in these days. You just build a website, get some supply on it, and you have some really smart people with who know search engines and so on and so forth. So those are really helpful in things like hospitality or travel or many other markets, Amazon, retail, so on and so forth. In order for flexible workspace to evolve from where it is, roughly 3 to 5% of the office market, to 20%, 30%, there need to be some organizing principles and organizing forces. And it's interesting now, there are three big examples. There's the CBRE investment in Industrious.
Yeah.
There's the Yardi, although it's not Yardi Systems, it is Yardi as investment in WeWork. And there's the IWG investment in Instant. Those three forces are all similar. They're not same in their tone and tenor, and they're not identical in their strategy, but they're all examples of, hey, we see that the maturation of this industry. So the way we think about it is these are three companies making transformative global investments in this industry, right? It's moving from, and I said this to Jamie Hidari when I met with them 18 months ago. I said, JV, are you running a business that's changing the way people work? Or are you running a cash flow business? Because I bet you started thinking one and you probably think the other now. He said, if I had to admit, it's a cash flow business. And he said it in a much more elegant way and a very charismatic way that I was blown away by. But he did it. He did admit that's where we are. And that's a sign of, or that's where Industrious is. And that's a sign of a maturation of a business. It really is. So to get back to your question about conflict, you didn't use the word conflict, but let's be honest, there are inherent conflicts in all three of these, right? Um, but you asked me about Instant and IWG. The way that this falls down, to be honest, I'll tell you how it doesn't fall down, and I'll tell you how it does.
Sure.
This group generates more demand for flexible workspace than anyone else by 3x today, globally, by
And
3x. That is a lot. And you know what? It's funny, as I've gotten to know you and gotten to know others, and as high minded as a lot of our conversations are, what operators really want from the Instant Group or CBRE or anything is revenue. Hey, we do our own sales and marketing, we generate our own leads, but there are certain customer groups like enterprise that it's hard for us to attract without
Mhm.
help. So one of the benefits that we can offer is that, and this group generates 3 times the demand of anybody else, which is great. But the way that we can mess it up is if we don't represent what we call a transformative global investment in a marketplace with the intention to serve the whole market. To make it work, there is no doubt, and this is what I live every day, that we have to guarantee market neutrality. We have to. And so a good chunk of what I do every single day and more now every day is talk about how do you operationalize that? We have a data transparency pledge that we hand out, that we sign, that we back, that says we will do these things and we won't do these things. That's one of the ways you do it. Another way is it's how people behave, right? How do your salespeople behave? And I get, in fact, on Friday, had an operator call me and say, your salesperson who doesn't work for me, but just said, hey, that was a really weird thing that they did. Can you explain that and talk to him or her on our behalf? And we do. So some of it is fancy legal language. Some of it is behavior. But all of that leads to trust. There is literally no way that any of the world's marketplaces, be it Amazon, Airbnb, Expedia, Alibaba, any of them exist if people who put their supply or their goods on it do not trust the marketplace. That it doesn't work. And I think I'm very aware that we have financial backing from the largest operator in the world, and my customers are all operators, right? So the biggest conflict is in this delivery of revenue, are we favoring one operator? And the answer is no, we're not. And we can't, because the moment we do, it's not going to work.
That is really interesting. And I'll tell you why. Because you brought up Amazon. And that was one of the examples that I've discussed in kind of roundtables off the record with folks. And they're like, yeah, if they become, and by they, Instant Group becomes the world's largest aggregator, which you already are, according to your numbers, does that not mean that they could then follow the Amazon model of knowing where there is demand, knowing where there is a good product to be sold, and then creating your own version of the product to undercut the suppliers who are listed on your marketplace? I only bring that up, not because I don't trust you, but I like to ask the questions that people ask me,
Right.
but also because you have the managed office solution. Now, your managed solution, can we just dig a little bit into that before we carry on this thread? It's not creating co-working spaces, right? It's creating branded spaces for specific clients. Is that correct? Your managed
Correct.
spaces?
Yeah. Individual single tenants, oftentimes large corporates, more
Okay,
often than not.
that makes a lot more sense because folks always, okay, they're going to run their own co-working spaces and they now have the data about where good co-working spaces run, what they're charging, how much it is, what their capacity rates are. Does that not mean that you could pull an Amazon and release Amazon basic headphones to compete with the high standard headphones? So the fact that you're not doing that actually answers that question. And the fact that it's for a single tenancy removes that entire flow of questioning. My next question for you on the idea of aggregation is, you sell products to operators. As your business model, you sell premium listings or assistance or other services. Would you say that because of their investment in the group, IWG has early access or better preferential treatment on those products than, say, a small indie operator in a city like Manhattan?
No, in fact, they don't. And in some cases, they've been the pricing they get is identical. The access they get is identical. I'll tell you an interesting story because it was a sincere test of my role and the company I work for. I'm not kidding. Within the first 2 weeks of me working for the Instant Group, what I did prior, yes, ran Upsuite, but I sold it to another company first. And while I was at that company, was called Squarefoot. There, I developed a practice with a partner of mine to use data from the marketplace to advise co-working operators on new locations. And we ended up working with 12 different operators, including IWG, and got to know what they're really looking for and got to know what the other 11 that we work with are looking for as well, what their criteria are, and so on and so forth. And one of those things was give us early access to closed or likely to close co-working. So coming over to Instant, some of my clients were the ones that recommended that I come to Instant because of the data set that the company has. It's more global, it's more transactional, it's been around longer. So pretty soon I got an ask for a preferential piece of data from IWG.
Mhm.
And I said, oh boy. And it came through the CEO
Mhm.
and it came through the CEO's executive assistant. And I said, no, wondering what would come back and if I'd still have a job. Nothing came back. So, so that was the first of kind of many kind of small kind of experiences that I've had to say, hey, I think the group is serious about what it's saying. But here's something that really, there are two things that I would share about this that I've learned since. Number one is a purely financial one, which is um, IWG is a publicly traded company, which means it has a fiduciary responsibility for shareholder value. Anybody that looks at shareholder value knows that multiples of marketplaces are very favorable compared to multiples of channels, right? And the difference is a marketplace serves the whole market. A channel is a sales and marketing vehicle for one operator. That gets a multiple of X. The marketplace probably gets a multiple of 10X. So should the group pursue the channel strategy, which prefers one operator, it will cost itself a lot of money and shareholders will notice, and it is not a good financial strategy. So that's one of the things that gave me a lot of confidence, the backing of the idea. Um, the other thing was reframing. I think a lot of people in the market see the president of IWG looking out over the market. And let's be honest, it has more than 10x the locations of, or roughly 10x the locations of its next closest,
Yeah.
you know, comparison, right?
Yeah.
That's a really big difference. So I think the market has looked at IWG. Is it going to come in and take us over? And Instant has looked at it that way too. Did we get taken over? Right? Because Instant for 25 years was an independent, did not have an investor or owner like that. Credit to Tim Rodber, who actually said, actually, Ben, you're not thinking about it the right way. What's really happening here is the group is taking these things that it's built to grow its business and using them to represent the market. That is what this strategy is. And so to me, that makes a lot of sense, especially when combined with the economic realities of how marketplace businesses are valued relative to operators. So to me, that's an executive level discussion. And I think it's good to share with your audience.
Yeah, both are very valid points. And on the financial one, we have heard whispers over the last kind of 2 years that IWG was looking to, maybe just relisting the Instant Group where they're exiting. A number of $1.8 billion was floated. There is that kind of savviness of, is this a pure investment play? And if it's better for the whole market for them to exit, instead of digging a little bit more into that, I want to go to the other side of what you said and the fact that you're taking the technology and this investment to do more good for all operators. Part of that strategy has been acquiring a whole bunch. I think it's up to 40 something aggregators right now. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. Like, how far down the line of pulling that all together into a seamless, cohesive experience are you? As someone who lives and breathes all day in integrating systems, the technical challenge of bringing in 40 platforms and putting them all together is fascinating to me, but probably not right for this audience, given that we could probably go too deep into the weeds. But what is the progress of pulling all of these 40 plus aggregators together? And at what point does it start introducing this concept of Worka?
Yeah. So the number we should probably talk about is 17 owned websites that generate demand for flexible workspace, unique brands within the group, right?
Mhm.
That plus enterprise sales and outbound sales, and really the largest sales team also in the market generates 3 times the demand of any other entity. So we should start with there. each one of those sites has equity with Google, equity in the market, and serves a slightly different purpose and a slightly different audience. Not unlike Expedia Group, right? That owns a number of different sites and will keep them going. It's not only Expedia.com, it's OpenTable, it's so on and so forth, which I guess I apologize, that's owned by Booking. So we have 17 of those that each one has its own merits, right? So those are all separate and will likely stay separate for reasons that they serve a slightly different audience and do their own thing. What we have done is we've centralized all the leads, literally every single lead that comes from those sites and there are new sites being added all the time, go through one funnel, right? So we did that already before the concept of Worka. But what the concept of Worka is a more centralized marketplace that's going to enable a few different things. One is corporate engagement with specific supply that meets their needs, right? So that's one part of it. Another part of it is more centralized single marketplace that will allow in time for booking, right? And payments.
Mhm.
And then the third one, which we've already launched, is the Worka Partner Portal, which is a central source of supply. So we're essentially at stage one of that. Well, I should say we've centralized all the leads already.
Mhm.
Uh, we've centralized all the supply now as well, and we're moving on to the marketplace and the corporate functionality that we've called Team. So we're in the midst of that. Even more than that, though, is how do you organize sales teams globally? How do you build the systems that connect everybody that everybody uses? How do you connect supply into it? So it's a lot more than just a kind of a public facing brand called Worka. It's a way of working to take all of this demand and get it to the appropriate operator on the appropriate day with the appropriate human on the other end who can help that client transact.
That is very interesting. And so, is there any possibility that the Instant Group becomes Worka as a brand, or will it always be the Instant Group, if you can share?
There's not a decision that's been made on that yet. And candidly, that's not my decision to make. My own opinion is I love the Worka brand, especially as it relates to operators, because what it stands for is it's got some newness, some freshness to it. It speaks to new ways of working, which is phenomenal, but it also speaks to impartiality, neutrality, um, and it's separate from the other brands, which is, oh, that's Worka. Oh, Ben, you work for Worka. Got it. So to me, I don't have a Worka email address, but my own opinion is that I like that we launched the partner portal to my customers
Mhm.
with the Worka brand because it's a statement of our intent. It serves the entire supply side of the market. Um, uh, it's neutral in how it works. Everybody uses the same tools. And I like that. I like that statement. And so I'm advocating every day for the growth of that brand. It is not, I have input in that decision. I do not make that decision.
Very well put. Definitely throwing you onto a little bit of hot seat on that one. So, given that is the strategy, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this question.
Maybe you're on the hot seat right now.
Maybe I am. I feel like I'm like trying to advocate for a whole bunch of different parties. So, tell me a little bit more about what happens on the Partner Portal. I log in, I'm a supplier. I have already some listings on some of the instant properties. What can I expect if I went to log in now and I haven't done so before? Like, what is the Partner Portal for the folks who are listening?
Yeah. Let's be honest. It's not rocket science. There are hundreds of portals out there that from a technical perspective, it's more modern, it's newer code, it it's purple. You can add not just desks to it, you can add meeting rooms to it, you can add things of that nature. It's got some geographic diversity, although it is in English, which I've advocated. We've got to have more localized language,
Mhm.
especially in Latin America and Asia and parts of Europe. So there's more we need to do, but it is a very standard portal. And you can also sign up for payments, right? To receive payments through the portal as well. So it in itself is having built one of those, having managed more sites than that has one, it in itself is a functional piece of software to gather supply.
Makes a lot of sense. And Is it at all connected to those other listing sites, or is it just another place for folks to come in and add their inventory?
So what we built so far is a service where we can connect that to, right now it's connected to instantoffices.com, it's connected to officespace.com, and that service exists to push inventory to the other 17 sites. We're in the middle of technical implementation on connecting that service to the rest of we call it the constellation of sites.
Very good word. I love the thinking of things in like an ecosystem or a universe. Constellation is a
Mhm.
fantastic word for what you guys have got. So there's a lot of big changes, both inside the firm and in the global economy. There's a lot of kind of rocking water. This means that obviously your pricing has had to change. Can you tell or at least address some of the changes that Instant and or Worker have had to change to your pricing that a lot of operators have had some thoughts about? What should they be expecting and why?
Yeah, I can. Essentially, what we're trying to do here with our pricing is, and the way we think of it as, how can we incentivize a much higher conversion rate than what we have gotten? So one of the big problems that any online marketplace has is it generates a lot of disproportionately small leads, right? So we call them 1 and 2 seat leads. And so one of the real challenges with that is those are not economic to transact on using a traditional brokerage model. So a traditional broker would just never do those deals. But if you have a lot of online demand, you have to figure out what to do with those. So we globally, we've tried all kinds of stuff. We've tried transacting with them ourselves. We've tried offshore teams. We've tried just emailing them out. We've tried integration. We've tried all kinds of things. What we found that works, and by works, again, this is going back to what operators need. We were converting when we were just emailing them out about 1% of those, even the ones that we heard about, very low. By applying a more sophisticated sales effort to it, where we're actually staffing in market salespeople to work those, we got that up to 10% in the first 4 markets in the world that we did. So if you think about that, what's the impact on operators? That may not be, they might still be getting some of those leads, but they're probably getting incrementally, maybe 2%, let's say, closed, but they're certainly not getting 10. So if we can invest a little bit more money, get 10x the return to the market, provide a better experience to the client, we should do it. And so to do that, one of the changes we made to our pricing is to say, for these types of leads, these 1s and 2s that we get, and candidly, we're not doing anything with, and they're probably having a poor experience, we will commit to invest the resources in the salespeople ahead of doing any kind of transaction if operators are committed to pay us 20% on those. And so we've rolled that out. That's been a big part of what we've been taking to market. And we've implemented this in 4 markets in the Netherlands, in Toronto, in New York, and Houston. And in all 4, we've gotten the conversion rate from 1% to 10%. So that's why I would call that an industry leading conversion model. That's a model that ultimately will not be unique to the Instant Group. That's a model that, if you look at other industries such as hotels, they might be charging 20%, 30%, 40% on bookings because they found a way that it benefits the supplier and it benefits the client and it benefits the operator. So that is one example of a pricing chain. There are others, but I think that was probably the one that you were asking about.
Yeah, that was definitely the one that I think what used to be 10% went up to 20%. So an almost 2x increase in the commission, but you're looking at a 10x increase in conversion rates. So if you look at those two numbers side by side, it makes sense why, and given all the things you said and the investments you're making and putting humans and faces and their voices behind those leads, it makes sense why that price increase is there. So hopefully that does answer the question for folks who raised it with me since you announced it.
Just to over communicate, on 3+ seat leads, it's still 10%. So
Got it.
because those transactions are large enough and the
Yeah.
clients are sophisticated enough that a human driven sales model is still appropriate. and there's enough fee in there to benefit all parties.
So you said human driven, but we're also seeing this huge surge in sales focused AI agents.
Hmm.
Is that something that you are exploring or thinking about how to augment that human team so that you can scale a little bit better and more kind of unit economically?
Yes. Yeah. Thinking about, writing about, but also actively using, right? So in some of our sites in the constellation, we're actively using it, email based sales agents, basically. And there's a couple different benefits there. One, having real estate specific sales agents that you can train, I think is still the state of the technology today. You can't just put a generalized LLM on it. Two, you can really learn. You can learn more by gathering that qualification data and putting it on large scale volumes of leads, more so than getting human feedback. So part of it is a learning mechanism and part of it is a commercial. Um, it's early stages, but I believe that kind of technology does unlock for operators the ability to transact on smaller leads because it's expensive for them to put their sales teams on it as well.
So I really want to bring you in onto this week in co-working undercurrents we're doing into AI agents, because one of the questions we've asked a lot of operators is you have an AI agent, they have an AI agent. These two AI agents are going to communicate at some point together. And what does it mean when everything goes well? But also, who's responsible if something goes wrong? So I'm going to bring you back onto that. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in that conversation, I'm going to rope Ben into our undercurrents on AI agents as well. So we've asked you a whole bunch of questions, Ben, and I hope I've addressed almost all the ones that folks have submitted. But is there any questions that you wish I had asked that I didn't?
That's a good one. I think one of it is really what's the future of the industry, right? I'm I am part of the founding team of a ULI Urban Land Institute product council on flex and experience that's designed to help the traditional real estate industry start to value these flex revenue streams because we see it as the future. But one of the people that I really admire for their long-term view is Scott Homa with JLL. And I asked Scott, I said, okay, I got into this industry when I read your paper in 2018 that said 30% of the market is going to be flex by 2030. And I'm just like, that's 10x growth in that period. That's a really big change. In this time, we've seen so much more change than I think probably what Scott thought. But here was what he said, giving credit to him. He said, hey, we're very much on track to meet that goal, but how I'm defining flex is changing. And I think that first of all, he said, all I really said is that if corporates have their way, his clients, 30% of their portfolios would be flex. He didn't say that the supply side would change that fast. And I think what I would say is real estate's amazingly, I think, has struggled a lot to keep up with the changing demands of the worker and the workplace. And the worker and the workplace are going to find ways to get what they need with or without the suppliers and hopefully with. So what, but there have been some very real challenges holding the supply side back. Interest rates being so high are hurting investment in the sector. There's not venture funding like there was in
Mhm.
2017, 2018 that was flowing to operator after operator who were getting lots and lots of funding. And then three, there was a very tight sublease market, particularly in the US back then. All of those conditions created the conditions for the meteoric rise. And so what I do think is coming for the industry is hopefully faster adaptation by the supply side, right? Um, and that probably means asset light business models. It probably means really innovative reuse of space. It means repositioning of space that I think is really exciting. Um, but it certainly doesn't mean a slowing in the pace of evolution uh, of space providers. I think it's much more of an acceleration, and so that's exciting. I'm excited also to be working with operators who are trying to figure that out because it remains both an exciting place to work, but also a strangely traditional in a lot of its thinking. So that was the one question you didn't ask is, hey, what does the near future bring? And I think it brings that.
Ben, well said. Thank you for hopping on and for digging into these questions with me. So what do you think before we hop out? Was it a hot seat, tempered seat?
I think it's an appropriate seat. I think you I think you do a good job of picking good questions that you pick questions that I get every day, right? I do have to be thoughtful about how I answer them, but you can probably tell this wasn't my first time, right? And no, I think it hot or not, it's my seat.
Thank you for sitting in it, Ben. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing so openly. For folks who are looking to meet Ben, I'm pretty sure he's going to be at the conferences that are coming up around the corner. Look out for him. You cannot miss him at any of these conferences. Until next time, we'll see you again. Take care.
Thanks, Hector. Appreciate it.